Hi, everyone. Professor Graham here checking in with you. I thought I would go over the short stories that you've read um, and just kind of talk to you about some of the answers. So forgive me if I seem a little distracted. I'm pulling up the assignment so I can read the questions. So I'm just going to run through these. Please do watch this video in full, even if you get bored. It will help when you write your essays, which are due in just a few days, in 6 days. You'll have your first essay due. So based on some of your answers, there were a lot of you that really understood the assignment in terms of how to format the answers. The others are getting there or have gotten there through revision. So thank you for revising and remembering the MLA format henceforth. The Raymond Carver story, Cathedral. If you didn't watch the biography videos on the authors that you are going to write about, please do that, and also do any supplemental research on your own. If there's something about the story you didn't quite understand, or you felt like maybe it could mean a couple things, or maybe something seemed symbolic to you, but you're not sure what that symbol meant, look it up, right? You're always welcome to do research. All of these stories are classics in their own right, and they've been written about, they've been analyzed, and there's a lot of information you can find on both the authors and the stories themselves. Okay, and they're a little bit challenging on their own, especially Hemingway, right? So let's just talk a little bit about Carver's Cathedral. First of all, a little just background information. You might know that he lived in Oregon and Washington. He also lived in Sacramento and was a janitor at the hospital, at Mercy Hospital, I think it was. And he was an alcoholic up until the end of his life, and he died of emphysema or lung cancer, one of the two. He was a heavy smoker. He was abusive to his first wife, and married young, and had a second marriage with a poet named Tess Gallagher. She's an award-winning poet on her own, and they had a very happy, harmonious marriage. And then he died. So sorry, that's sad. But he's also very well known for his themes of isolation in relationships, male-female relationships, and father-son relationships. So if you are interested in these things, he's certainly one to read. But I think the way he tells a story, what he doesn't tell the reader is as important as what he does tell the reader. So what he doesn't say, but sort of leaves the reader to find out on their own and have an epiphany on their own, right? So the story is called Cathedral, not The Cathedral, but Cathedral. And the first question asks, is the narrator a sympathetic protagonist? Does our opinion of him change as the story progresses? Does the narrator develop or change or grow over the course of the evening? Well, the short answer is yes, right? The long answer is up to you to sort of explain why your opinion changes. And I would say for me, it's because we see his arc of learning. We hear his interior dialogue that is, he stereotypes, he's jealous, he's negative. If you want to just say that, I think he's a negative person. He has his walls up, and I just sort of explained number 2 in addition to number 1, which is question asks, what are the primary emotions displayed by the narrator throughout? I think I just said that. And how can we understand them in terms of the life he leads? You know, one of the things, this is where I want to explain setting to you guys and how important setting is. Setting is more than just the place, like a living room, right? Or the grocery store. It's setting is time and place. So we want to consider politics. We want to consider maybe, you know, if someone lives in, you know, the South in the 1800s and they're female, they're probably doomed if they don't marry someone, right? Because women can't necessarily work. They can't support themselves. There's a lot of social norms of the time, right? That would make things pretty difficult. So in terms of this guy, the blind guy, right? Which, so one thing Carver's doing here is there is a blind man with a physical blindness, but the blind guy in this story is the narrator, really, right? There's a blind man, but the real blind guy is this he's blinded by stereotypes, jealousy, you know, things like that. Feeling inadequate. So there are a lot of different things happening that drive this narrator. Okay, I just kind of did that. What does alcohol play in his life? Well, the character took a lot of drinking to loosen up, right? Before that, he was very off-put, and it wasn't until Bub, and wasn't it Bub the narrator, and then Robert is the man with the physical blindness. You know, alcohol breaks down barriers between the two of them and kind of loosens up the jealousy. So what is it about Robert that unsettles the narrator? Well, he doesn't fit the stereotype. And people who stereotype don't like to think outside the little box that they've created in their mind, right? Just kind of moving through here. Do you think that his outlook will change? I think we hope so, right? Maybe not immediately, but maybe some of the time he will, is kind of how I would answer that. Sorry to be a little bit vague, but you know, most people don't change completely overnight, but if anyone does, it would be Bub in this situation, because you know, them working together, the two characters drawing the cathedral together, the translation that is unspoken. It's really hard for someone to discuss, because there's a song lyric that's coming to my mind where it's that between thought and expression, it lies a lifetime. And I think in this case, he's having thoughts and feelings and opinions that are so new to him that he might not even have the words for what's happening when he's watching the TV. Now, just to go into the minutia of the story, there's the black and white TV and the color TV, and they're kind of talking about what, you know, Robert says, well, I can tell if it's color or black and white. Don't ask me how, I just know. And so there's this innate knowing, there's an instinct, that this knowing that doesn't have to be seen. And therefore, Robert is is well aware of things. He's aware. He may not be able to see, but he is certainly not blind to feelings, or to whether someone can only see in black and white versus whether they can see in color. Now, yes, they're talking literally about a TV set, but it could easily be argued that Robert's letting Bub know, I can see without seeing. So there's a translation that happens on this otherwise average piece of paper. Don't they tear a piece of paper bag and draw together using a pencil? Now, the term epiphany is used in literature to describe when a character has a new foundation from which to see from. They have seen the light, right? So it's an epiphany. It's a new, it's used in religion as well, when someone is kind of converted from being blind, but now I see, right? There's a hymn that goes with that. Now, there's no mistake that Carver's using cathedral to translate, using this story to translate an epiphanal moment for an otherwise normal guy, right? Of his time, probably in the 70s. I don't know. I don't know when this is written. I'm just going off the top of my head. You can look it up if you write about it. Okay. Because what would that mean for men? I mean, men have a whole subset of rules on machoism and romantic ownership and all this other stuff. So anyway, these are some of the things that are challenging our protagonist, and seeing this epiphanal moment, using the cathedral as a symbol of something that maybe we take for granted, or maybe we get used to seeing. And then suddenly when we really think about it, there's this whole new construct, right? So cathedral has a big bang. Now, Carver's style is really minimal, and he also, if you read it a couple times, knowing what's happening from the beginning, like if you read it once, sure, you read it, but if you read it twice and then maybe even read it a third time, you'll really see how Carver uses words, and Hemingway does this as well, especially, but he tells you stuff without telling you, or without, leaving it up to you to have your own epiphany as a reader, right? So just real quickly, while I'm talking about that, using the term the reader. So some of you are doing a great job, again, showing analysis and really doing your best. But I do want to just tell you that if you're talking about the reader, don't say we see, right? We see, or I see that this character has changed. You would say the reader, right? So we want to separate we don't want to use any words like we, you, or I in this writing, in this class. We want to use the terms, the literary terms. So there's the writer. Also, I'd like to point out that there's a big difference between the narrator and the author. They are not the same thing necessarily, okay? So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the Hemingway story, about the narrator. But I did want to point out that there's a difference. So I'm just going to move along now. And if you want to hit pause and come back to this, I'm going to move on to the Kate Chopin story of an hour. So Kate Chopin was a writer. She was from New Orleans. She was originally from St. Louis, Missouri. She moved to New Orleans. She married a rich French guy. She was Irish. She married into the name Chopin. And they had, I think, 7 or 8 children. And she was very much a housewife and a mother and dedicated to running the household earnestly. And then her husband died from, if I'm not mistaken, from malaria, which a lot of people were dying of in New Orleans at the time. And so she was a widow, she was a mother, and she had this whole new sort of life ahead of her, and she never remarried. And she started writing, and she had a literary salon in her living room and hung out with, you know, artists and different people. And in her own way, she was considered very controversial in her time, because it was in the South in the late 1800s. And, you know, she was doing things, living a freer life than many women were allowed to live. And what made her worse, right, to the establishment, if you will, to society, is that she would write from a feminist perspective. And so she's known as a feminist writer. But what makes her literary style so interesting, in addition to her subjects, is her element of surprise. The first Kate Chopin's short story I ever read is called Desiree's Baby. And if you're ever kind of looking for something new and interesting to read, it's the story that I related or learned first about foreshadowing, because she foreshadows in her stories, and there's suddenly this switcheroo usually at the end, and it makes it really interesting. So I'm just going to kind of go through, as you know, as you probably noticed, her works are very short. They're not super long. I think this one is like 2 or 3 pages, I think, in total. So that's what makes it really interesting as well. Her major work was called The Awakening, and it was a banned book, because it shows a woman who is widowed, I think, and lives a free life, has a couple affairs, and just never feels comfortable in the society she's in. And rather than adhere to that cage of society, she ends up committing suicide by walking into the ocean. And that's become a trope, actually, in literature. If you see a woman in the ocean, you're like, uh-oh, you know, it's something that has happened since, because of this famous short. The Awakening is a vignette. It's a short novel. So anywho, okay, so let's talk about Story of an Hour. As you can see, it's a feminist piece. It's very brief. The nature of Mrs. Millard's heart trouble is the first thing you learn about. And of course, there's the physical ailment that people are aware of. And then there's this sort of secret life that she has that she doesn't really share with anyone else. Maybe she's even unaware of it until she is free, right? So she's unaware that maybe she's not as happy living as a sort of kept wife, you know, in her corset and in her house, and like sort of in that gilded cage. So the first question asks, is this symbolic or ironic? And of course, we kind of know, since we've all read the story, that it's both. It's symbolic and ironic, because it will kill her in the end. But what kills her isn't the fact that she has a weak physical heart. What kills her in the end is this return of a husband at the end. Again, there's that Kate Chopin switcheroo, where the reader knows something that the other characters in the story are unaware of. That's where the irony comes in, right? So when she dies, it's the shock of having this taste of freedom that she had only for an hour, right? That's the title, The Story of an Hour. She sat for an hour imagining this new life of freedom, where she didn't have to, get up and cook and clean and do whatever it is that women did back then. She could make choices outside of these, this gridded out life for herself. So that's what makes this such a beautiful little piece. It's so small, and yet it has such a huge impact. And as you all know, there's lots of symbolic stuff happening, from looking out the window, which is a new perspective. That's what that symbolizes in literature. If someone's looking out the window, if they're seeing a new perspective. The sky is blue, there are clouds, she hears birds, there's trees, there's this natural innate happiness that she's starting to feel that wasn't there. And yeah, she is sad, and it does say that she is sad. At first, her first response is, oh my goodness, I'm so sad. And then when she sits by herself and she dries her eyes and she starts to envision, it doesn't feel so bad anymore, right? The delicious breath of rain that was in the air. Rain in literature or in movies, any water is a symbol of transition. So our character is transitioning into a new self whenever they take a bath or stand in the shower, or in this case, the rain, right? And so on. The relationships she had were a little bit formal. They were stereotypical. These people in the story didn't necessarily know her secret thoughts, right? And then when the husband arrives, and there's that beautiful Chopin ironic twist, and she has this heart attack, and everyone says, well, she died from her what is it, her heart or something. And it's, the irony, of course, is that we know she's so sad, really like disappointed in losing this freedom she had for 1 hour, to everyone's like, oh my gosh, she just was so, it's her poor heart, so there's that ironic thing that the reader knows that the other characters do not. Okay, now we're just going to kind of keep moving. So if you want to hit pause and come back, I'm going to talk about Hills Like White Elephants. So Hemingway cannot be spoken about enough. He's much considered the one of the finest, if not the finest, American authors in the 20th century. You are encouraged to look him up and read about him if you haven't, but he was from Chicago originally, overbearing mother, learned how to write as a journalist at a newspaper. So he learned, in newspapers, they get paid per word. And so when journalists are paid to write an article, it's like for 200 words or something. So he learned how to omit words and fashion sentences and include only the necessary details and things like that. And it strongly influenced his writing style that he became so famous for. He was an emergency vehicle driver, like an ambulance driver in the war for the Italian army, I think, in World War I. I know that. He has written many novels and short stories about the irony of heroism, or the irony of glory. And he writes from the male perspective quite often. Again, very male-centric writer, and hunting, war, things like that. And his male characters are usually wounded by the women that they're with, So not everyone loves Hemingway, particularly feminists don't like the way he writes women, but I have loved Hemingway since high school, for like, forever, and I can read him in my sleep. So anyways, I love him to death. And this short story in particular, Hills Like White Elephants, is very brief. It's short, so it's not a super long read. However, it is a challenging read, isn't it? So I'm just going to kind of explain. So the first question asks, what is important about what is not being said in the story? Many of you answered this question directly. Some of you kind of danced around it, like you didn't know what was not being said in the story. So this was the place to kind of say what was not being said in the story, which is the couple is talking about an abortion. The male is trying to influence the female and coerce her into having an abortion. She does not know what she wants to do, right? So that is what is important about what is not being said in the story, is that they're not saying the word abortion. This story was written in the early 1900s. I think it was like 1916, you can look it up, or the 1920, somewhere in there, very, very long time ago, 100 years ago, and it would have been highly controversial. And I think we could argue today, so here's the question, class, for all of these stories is this still relevant today? Right? And if so, and the answer is usually yes. Okay. And then the question is really like, answer to yourself, think about it. Why is it still relevant? Well, this is still a controversial discussion. It's still something that isn't, table talk, right? It's something that is nobody's business. And so that's what this couple is talking about. And the way Hemingway lets the reader know that is, honestly, class, it's by using different words throughout the story. Like, do you remember we're told that they both order drinks and the waitress puts the wet glass on the pads, right? He describes the table legs. They just put a little air in and then it goes away. It's fine. It's nothing, right? So it's implied, and there are symbolic words that, or I don't know, because they don't necessarily symbolize, but they plant an image in the reader's head. So they're like, oh, what is this? Now, the next question is, who or what are the narrators of the story? And I'm sure you all noticed that it's all dialogue, and there's no like he said, she said, then he said, then she said. It's just line, 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 right? And you figure out who's saying what. You get into a rhythm, and you, the reader, are picking up on what, as you're reading along, you're starting to understand what it is that they're talking about. Oh, the beaded curtain behind the curtain, things like that. So there are these images that kind of put you on at a table, and there's soaking pads and things that would be associated with an abortion, right? So the idea is really that there is not a narrator. It's what I think Hemingway is doing here, class, is putting you at a table listening to this couple, and you're overhearing this conversation, and you're like, oh, what are they talking about? Oh my gosh, right? So that is what the rhythm and the style really are there for. So there is no narrator in the story. It's more like you're overhearing this conversation, this private conversation. And they, of course, wouldn't have to say abortion because they know what they're talking about. Okay, so there's that. Now the question is, the male character admirable? And is the female character admirable? Class, this is a guy trying to convince her to have an abortion, and she really doesn't have a lot of options. She doesn't have, you can tell she's young. She doesn't have a lot of money, if any. She's kind of dependent on this guy, and they don't have jobs. They are traveling and they're at a train stop. So there's a lot of imagery, and like you get the feeling that this is a unsettled couple, and will they even last, right? So they look out, they're looking at the landscape, and on one side it's very, very dry, there's nothing there, it's just barren, and on the other side there are trees and a river, and it's lush and green. So you're given that feeling as a reader that there's a choice to be made, right? And there's some images there, and they talk about these hills like white elephants. A white elephant gift at a party is one that nobody wants. So there's this nobody wants this kind of thing. It's a white elephant gift. And then visually, and I think somebody said this in their answer, that perhaps it looks like a big belly, right? So there's this sort of looming in the background, there's this big sort of pregnant looking mountain, right? So there's that. Just looking at the question. The man can speak Spanish, but the girl cannot, which indicates that he's more sophisticated. He's maybe even been in the situation before. If he knows both sides of this conversation or the language, there's that. It's something you could read into that. And then you're asked, oh, and then the word jig, which is what he calls her. Jig is a short dance. So there's also that indication that maybe this isn't meant to be. This is a short-term relationship. So okay, so that's a little bit about that. And then I'm going to move on to Updike. Okay, so if you want to hit pause and come back, I'm just going to kind of roll through these Updike questions. What is the setting of the story? So as you guys all know, it is a grocery store. So I want you to imagine a Safeway or something like that. But a setting, as I said before, is more than just the grocery store. In this case, it's on the East Coast. It's in the 50s, 1950s. So it's a very conservative time in a conservative place. I do want to point out Langle, the name Langle, the name of Sammy's boss. If you said that in French, it's Langle, you know, Engel. It's the white guy is what it means. So there's this sort of there's some stuff going on like with that. I think is a little, it's kind of funny. This isn't a super serious story, so don't overthink anything. What we are seeing is a teenage boy who is moved to defend these scantily clad girls in bikinis, as you know, and he makes this big romantic gesture to impress them. And you have to ask the question, do you think they care? Do they even know? Will they ever know? Will he ever see them again? So this is a true coming of age story where, you know, before he quits his job, he has a lot of feelings that lead up to this climax. And it's him learning to be a man or trying to be a man. You know, it's kind of questionable at the end, like, uh-oh, was this the right thing to do, really? And I think we all can agree it's not going to get him anywhere, that's for sure. But what's happening, what Updike does when he writes about this is he's, you know, when you notice in the grocery store, for example, there are items that are all sort of lined up and in the same, you know, box or can or something. There's like these images of rows of uniformity, and he's setting that's literally part of the setting that goes hand in hand with this New England sort of, very conservative outlook. And the girls in bikinis would be controversial today, unless we were in San Diego right next to the beach or something like that. It would be pretty weird no matter where you were. Even again, like I said, today, 2022, if you saw 4 or 5 girls come in to a grocery store with nothing but bikinis and flip-flops on. So imagine that happening in Yuba City or in Marysville. It just would be out of place. So at the very least, they wouldn't be asked to leave, but at the very least, people would turn their heads. So thinking different thoughts. Okay. So, so there isn't a whole lot, more than that, other than just this sort of a time and a place, and then it goes hand in hand. Updike wrote similarly to Carver. He wrote a lot of stories about male issues and like how the masculinity is formed in society, right? So we have both male centric and female centric stories to look at. Okay, I'm going to move on here to Oates and Poe. So if you want to hit pause and come back, I'm going to cover Oates. So where are you going? Where have you been? There are a couple of things going on with this. Joyce Carol Oates is a fantastic and highly acclaimed American author. She has a very unique writing style and is, I would say, kind of unpredictable in terms of themes. This one in particular, believe it or not, is based on a real occurrence. Connie and Arnold Fiend, or Friend, I don't see Friend. I always, because I know what it's the irony there is you take the R out and it's Fiend, right? So this guy is a real freak. But in the real life story that happened, it was in the news. Joyce Carol Oates read it and then responded by writing this story. Using some of the details from the actual, this is a fictional story, but it really did happen. So she's fictionalized what happened. So there is a young girl who, it's interesting because what I think is really interesting about this story is that a lot of people, a lot of readers like to blame Connie and call her vain or call her like she's an extraordinary example of something, whereas I feel like she's an average teenage girl who just a nonconformist, testing the boundaries, wearing clothes that she shouldn't, and going to places that she shouldn't, like a lot of teenagers do, right? This is not super abnormal behavior. Dating an older guy secretly or wanting to is kind of really her crime at this point. So she was just being sort of what I call an average teenager with some of the average teenager issues. Didn't want to go to the family function or whatever, stayed home alone. And unfortunately, this led to the end of her life. So Arnold Friend is this guy that shows up with his buddy, and they kind of coerce her and stuff. And it turns into, as you know, a violent scene where he ultimately takes her to a field, and we're shown her last surrendering view, and that whole, it's kind of starts in the kitchen, and there are some noises she's making that, to me, when I read it, make her sound like a rabbit caught in the jaws of a prey or something, like she's been attacked and she's surrendering, not unlike a rabbit would surrender to you know, a fox or a coyote. Sorry to be brutal, but that's what we're seeing here is a kind of a bad guy attacking and eventually killing this girl. And then there's this, there are ways that Joyce Carol Oates shows us that he doesn't really care about, he's not killing her because of her personality. He's killing her because he can, because he saw the opportunity and he took it, because he killed her. He killed her because he's a killer, right? So and the reason, you know, I would say just right up, this is all off the top of my head, but you know, when Arnold Friend sings a song about someone, you can tell me this, whether it's a song about someone with blue eyes but Connie has brown eyes, or vice versa. So it's really, he's in his own experience, and it's not, he doesn't feel necessarily you know, connected to her soul or anything like that. He's just killing this girl because he can. Now, the question about him being an evil entity, some of this comes from him having strange feet, almost like he's got cloven feet. Well, in the real story that I was telling you about, the man who Arnold Friend is written about or based on, he stuffed his shoes with newspaper to make himself look taller. So just as a point of interest. However, I think, and that was the way it was written in the newspaper article, but Joyce Carol Oates is using fiction to show this sort of more cloven foot image. And then his the license plate number, if you look it up, you'll find there is a Bible verse that I can look up and find it, or you actually could do that, but I can't off the top of my head remember what it is, but it is significant, and it's not been confirmed that this is what it's directly about. However, if you look it up, you can draw your own conclusions and argue one way or the other if you choose to write about the essay. So I've always enjoyed that story, even though it's really creepy. All right, lastly, if you want to hit pause and come back, I'm going to talk briefly about the Poe story, The Cask of Amontillado. So here we have a story written by one of my favorite American authors, Edgar Allan Poe, East Coast, 18th century or 19th century, but in mid 1800s. Lived in Boston. He was quite a character. He was a critic and didn't have a lot of friends in his lifetime, but he had a controversial life. I mean, he married his cousin, and then she died, and she's inspired a lot of his works. And then he went to he found someone to remarry, and he actually died right before he could do that, on a train, well, in transit, to pick up his mother-in-law from the one that died, who was his aunt. So gets a little convoluted, but anyways, I adore Edgar Allan Poe's works, and I think a lot of you do as well, based on some of your responses. So let's just look a little bit at The Cask of Amontillado. Our characters are Montresor and Fortunato. Fortunato is an ironic name because he's very unfortunate, right? But his name is Fortunato here. Montresor has taken a deep offense to something he said that is never really mentioned, right? A lot of people have no idea what, you know, if you go looking for this in the story, it's very hard to find, because frankly, class, Fortunato didn't really do anything to end up sealed, you know, buried alive. He slighted Montresor in a previous conversation about wine. They were talking about wine, basically, and Montresor said something, oh, this one vintage is the best, and Fortunato said something like, oh, there are better ones, and so Montresor has been carrying a grudge ever since, like, I'm gonna kill that dude. So he's a frenemy, they're frenemies, and he basically, as you guys know, they meet at oh, you're here, fancy meeting you here, right? Meets him at the carnival, gets him drunk, and says, I have the best wine down here, you gotta taste it. It's called the Cask of Amontillado, right? Spanish wine. So it's below a carnival, and so the carnival is if you imagine it, there's a lot of people screaming, having fun on the fun rides or joyous activities, and children scream anyways, you know what I mean? So it would have been kind of like if you've seen the movie Lost Boys, there's like this people on the rides and playing games and having a fun and everything. And then so Fortunato, once he realizes he's been buried alive and starts screaming for help, no one will ever hear him, right? So he's gonna pass out down there and wake up in a black hole and eventually just die in it. So so what theme or perception about life or human nature does Poe communicate in this story? Well, revenge is definitely, there's revenge, there's murder, there's insanity, right? So describing the mood or atmosphere, don't you see how this carnival, if you just like visualize it, there'd be this bright, happy carnival, and then just underneath it, there's like the sewer almost. It's the catacombs, which, they probably walked with a torch, and, so it's just, you can imagine it, I'm sure. So it's very creepy, and to emphasize the creepiness, the carnival really contrasts that. That's also a little trick Hemingway does, is to work with contrast, like right before a character dies or comes upon a really deathly scene, they might be eating jam on toast or honey or some kind of, so there's always like sugar. He'll take something really sweet and then contrast it with like dead, something dead. So just to really punch the reader with what the author, any author does this, but Poe does this and Hemingway do this to really, give it more punch. So that's what the significance of this carnival is there's this total like juxtaposition of it makes the darkness look that much darker, right? So that's how he helps create the mood. There's that last jingle of the jester hat that Fortunato had on for that fun night he had planned. And then there it is, like, oh, so sad, he's gone, he has no idea, and he really doesn't deserve, Poe doesn't, I think Poe wants the reader to really know that he would never understand why this is happening. If he weren't so drunk, he might, it's too late. He's doomed from the start of the story, but he's never gonna, it's not like this is for a good reason. So yes, okay, so those are some of the thoughts and responses. If there's ever a question about the work that you're reading and you don't feel comfortable asking me, I would love for you to make a friend in the class, not by posting your information publicly and saying, call me, but actually, when you're reading the short story discussions and looking at each other's choices, maybe choose a person to send using the Canvas email, and just say, you know, I kind of would like a buddy in the class, or she told us to, Professor Graham told us to make a buddy in the class. So that way, if you have thoughts, questions that maybe you'd rather speak to a peer about rather than me, you have that person. You can also exchange essays if you choose to do revision work. But the main point, class, is like, it's fun to make friends, right? And it's also just, it might make you feel more comfortable in the class to have someone to just exchange with in whatever capacity. So lastly, you can hit pause and come back to this, but I'm going to go to the short story prompts. So your essay number 1, you do have a video that I would like for you to open up and watch before you start to write your first essay. Okay, no matter what, because I walk you through how to format your essay, what we're looking for, and all that. So I will post a link in this assignment, but I believe it's in module 0. Okay, so you have compare the writing styles of 2 assigned authors. So you have your assigned authors. No, you may not choose an author outside of these assigned authors. We're just going to use the ones that you've covered here in these assignments. And this specifically says compare the writing styles. So you can choose any of the 6. And when you are comparing them, don't forget to discuss also what makes them different. A compare contrast essay always does both. And I also advise that you look in the files section at the student examples, so you have something to, you have your visual. So compare the writing styles of 2 assigned authors. That's going to include themes and any details from the stories to support your claims. Okay, and if you do, as you should, background information on the authors, maybe you'll see some similarities in their biographies, or you'll see a contrast, like while one went to war, the other stayed home and graded papers. You know, I don't know, but look for that also. Now, all of your submissions will include a works cited page, and I know you guys know how to do that, so you can use the ones here in these assignments as you've been doing in your homework. So number 2 says discuss the importance of the narrator's perspective and how it informs the reader, using examples from 2 or 3 assigned stories as support. Now, we have a lot of different styles of narration, and you can certainly choose. That's going to be, you know, you can choose the ones that are similar in some capacity or very, very different in some capacity. That's up to you. And again, you have 2 or 3 stories from that. So, and number 3 says compare common themes that you see in 2 seemingly different stories. So, and then there's a list of themes: revenge, shame, blindness, or a quest for love. Like Sammy was on a quest for love. And so that would be really interesting to find 2 completely, they seem really, really different, but in fact, you're arguing that these stories are really similar in theme. And you know, so I think that would be really interesting. And then of course, compare 2 coming of age stories. That's going to be where I have a very brief 6-minute lecture that I found on YouTube by another instructor, just covers what the characteristics of a coming of age story are. So that will help you choose which stories you'll write about. So again, there's the reminder to look in the files section. And I repeat myself, but I guess I'm consistent because here I also say don't begin writing before watching the video. So again, I will link that or somehow bring it to your attention to do that. Okay, hope that helps you guys. And I'm here if you need anything. The essay is due on the 27th. And so if I were you, I would finish up the discussion, the short story discussion as soon as possible. Choose your stories, think about them, make outlines, compare, you know, look at the examples. And then I also would really strongly suggest that you look at the rubric that's attached to the essay assignment. So when you go to draft your essay, you are aware of what the grading criteria is. Okay, everybody, hope that helps you. I know it's a lot, but I hope that helps. And I'll talk to you guys really soon. All right, bye.